Welcome to Family Childcare Insights Podcast, where we shine a light on family childcare, the unicorn of the early childhood education field. I am Patricia Dishler along with Donna Fowler, and we are excited to start this conversation with you. We question everything, including each other and the special guests and experts that we're going to have here along the way. We like to start each podcast with just a quick little segment on what's happening in the field. We got this segment inspired by our favorite author, Michael Bungay Stanier, and his 7 essential questions. So we're going to start with his first of those questions, which is, what's on your mind? So, Donna, let's start with you. What's on your mind today?
So recently, we know with COVID, a lot of funds have been being released to the field to support the work that is done. And one of the things that has become really confusing to me here lately in some of the articles that I've been reading is that the simple fact is that I see that like they're releasing funds and they're saying providers. And I cannot really tell whether that is family childcare providers, whether they're really referencing center providers. Is there equity in the amount of monies that are going to centers versus family childcare? And so that's really been on my mind is to this word provider and how there's kind of like this new use to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be something you and I dive into a little bit more in the future is, we're going to be talking more about the spectrum and what words are used to reference family childcare. So I'm right with you. That's one I've got a lot of questions about too. So we can definitely do that.
Yeah, it just seems to that they're starting to use the word provider to reference all early care and education, where we have been so used to in the past it just being used to reference family childcare, and that doesn't seem to be the case
Which
anymore.
means we need to dive deeper when we see the word provider to ensure that it does also include family childcare. Just be diligent.
Absolutely. So, Patricia, what's been on your mind?
Well, I was looking at some of the links that you sent me of articles that you recently found that reference family childcare online. And there was one that really caught my attention. It was in the Providence Journal. And it was talking about how in Rhode Island, they were celebrating the fact that they just got the union there that represents family childcare had just gotten a raise for the childcare subsidies coming from the state, which is awesome. It is great news. So I was really happy to read that and started reading into it. But then got a little bit where I was like, because they were reporting that the raise was 2.5%. 2.5%, and that this is something that they've been fighting for years and finally just got it. So they were very excited that they got it. Now, I also talked about that there was some other funding for some technology and training involved, but this was kind of the main gist of it. And for me, it just, while I'm excited and I'm happy and any win is a win in family childcare, there's still a big part of me that's like, really? It's not enough, people. 2.5% in a time when inflation was 8% in the last year. Like, really, this is where we're at. And I just feel like we're working so hard to chip away at these little wins and little wins without ever making big enough gains to really just make this a strong field, a strong career, and be able to really fully pay for quality. And, so we keep throwing the rest of the cost on the backs of parents. And we all know that they're at their breaking level. So it's not solving the problem. So it was a win, but I felt like it was almost like a bait and switch. I read the article thinking, oh, this is a big win for family childcare, but then walked away feeling like, are you kidding? We could do so much more, and we need to do so much more. So.
Absolutely, because we know when we really look at the profitability of family childcare, there's such a slim margin that all their costs have gone up from food to heating, all their utilities, everything has risen really to a degree that, yeah, 2.5% will help, but it's certainly not going to solve
Exactly.
the problem.
Exactly. Today, we explore the question, what does a quality family childcare environment look like? And I know you and I have had many, many long conversations of years and years on this topic, and it's one that gets both of us very riled up. We both have done lots of coaching that took us directly into family child care providers' home and being family child care providers ourselves. We had this experiences of others coming in, kind of telling us what that environment should look like. And I think, it depends on, the organization. There's some places that are really great at supporting family childcare environments and their uniqueness. Like we were said at the intro, we're the unicorn of early childhood education. We don't want to be that cookie cutter place that looks just like every other place out there. That was something I know I absolutely prided myself on in my program, Patty Cake Preschool, and it looked extremely different than everybody else's. I literally had a full size tree growing in the middle of the room, and all kinds of strange things because of my wonderful connection to my husband in construction. But beyond it being a creative environment and stuff, I think probably the biggest thing you and I tap into is the idea of don't take the family out of family childcare, and the examples we're seeing of that.
Yeah, that was a really big struggle, I think, for me, Patricia. I know that I did not have an early care and education background when I first came to family child care. I kind of fell into it. I had never worked in a center. I had never worked in education, and so as I got my license to care for children, there wasn't a whole lot of guidance on the environment. So I really relied a lot on what was out there to read, what was guidance from, my licensing specialist, from others around me. And I feel like I got these conflicting messages, right? And so as I began my family childcare home, it really was in this shared space with my family and so forth. But over time, I kind of felt very pressured, right? That in order to have a quality family childcare environment, that it somehow had to look like, a center down the
Right.
street,
Right.
right? That had gone to some catalog, had bought fancy expensive shelves, had bought fancy expensive materials and so forth. And I think I lost as I made that switch to having more of that. Like when you walked into my room, it looked like this kind of preschool. While there were some advantage to it, I think so much was
Yeah.
lost, right? So I remember my first environment, I had like this ugly, I mean, it was god awful, ugly orange chair. I mean, the thing was, over the years of having that my family childcare had been thrown up on, probably peed on, right? Children marked it all up. I mean, it was orange, but had like this brownish tone to it. Right? It was just probably didn't
Right.
smell that
Right.
great or whatever. Remember, I got rid of that orange chair, right, in my room, but I didn't recognize what was lost
So
from
you
it
got
over
rid of it
time.
because you felt the pressure from other entities saying it
I
didn't
felt
fit the
pressure.
mold.
I felt like, yeah, I felt like, okay, I've got to move my family childcare out
Sure.
of this space where there was a couch, where there was this chair, where my
Right.
family spent their time, into this space that really was dedicated solely to, my family childcare space that had none of that, right? So the family was no longer there. And I think about when I go back and think about now, and I had been recently going through some photos of my family childcare over the years, and I couldn't believe how many pictures I had of children curled up in that chair, reading a book, of children playing in that chair where they had gathered some materials and they crawled up there, of me holding a baby that was just crying, right? Soothing a child who was sick, waiting for their mother. And I think, my gosh, I just I would do things so differently today in a family childcare environment than I did before, because I felt this pressure that if I didn't have some sort of special
Right.
material, special furniture that came from an early childhood catalog,
Right.
that the learning
So,
wasn't
so it was
taking
more than
place.
just let's find a room that you can dedicate to this business. I'm a big proponent of the exclusive use space, because I did both, where I did it everywhere and then I did it exclusive use. And the downside of doing it within your family's personal areas, especially if you're going to do this for many, many years, is you start to feel not like you get to stay at home to work, but that you get to stay at work to be home. And so it's nice to have that separate place where you can close the door and go home at the end of the day. But the idea that just because you're moving it into a room where you can kind of keep it a little bit separate and protect your family's personal space, but that the idea that when you do that, when you put it in a different room within your same house, that it somehow needs to look completely different than all the other rooms within your house. I think that's where we get off track. I'm all for the idea of let's have a separate room, but why do we assume that that means because it's in a different room in our house, it has to look different than all the other rooms in our house? You that orange chair definitely should be in there. I had a really cruddy old brown couch in mine, and I didn't get rid of mine. I did have a lot of my home like environments, but I was definitely a unicorn of our field way back when. I figured that out when I first started. Unlike you, I did work in early childhood classroom first, and basically was inspired that I have so many strong opinions about what this should look like, this early care and education of children. I need to have my own business to do this because my ideas are very different than others. And then when I connected with family childcare providers, found out very quickly that most of them followed the path that you did. And so for me, the elements of the early childhood classroom I naturally brought along with me from my experience, but I was really excited about the idea of melding that with my that family, that home space. I mean, I grew up, raised by a stay-at-home mom, four girls, and I feel like I had a really fantastic childhood. And so that was something that was in my head a lot when I first started setting up my environment, is what from my childhood environment really led to myself and my sisters all becoming strong, independent women and entrepreneurs. What from that early childhood environment experience led to that. And so I wanted to make sure, I hung on to those kind of pieces as I started to create my environment. But I certainly did feel the pressure, like you were saying. I remember the first time somebody told me I needed to get rid of all the adult chairs in my space. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, this is a space for children. There should not be any adult furniture in here. Like, but there's an adult in here, and all these little ones come in with adults. Do we not want any adults to feel welcome in this space? That made no sense to me at all.
But it also takes that family
Exactly.
piece out too, right? Because I know that for years, Patricia, we've been doing this for a long time, that, you had a dad show up every morning and read to children, right? To curl up on that couch and to actually sit and read with children. I think we forget that a lot of times too, when we get rid of every adult chair, that what we're saying to the families who are adults, you're not welcome here. This isn't a space for you. This is only a space
Exactly.
for children. But why do you think, it just continues to boggle me of why do you think those who support family child care continue to pressure family child care providers to have a more I call it sterile
Yeah.
environment, really, devoid of the family.
I, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. And it does confuse me that that question even exists because you and I both also work with many, Head Start, school district, private childcare. So we've been in those places as well. And I'm often having conversations with those teachers and administrators where they're looking to create kind of that softer family like atmosphere in their environment, and they're asking for tips and tricks on how to do that. And so I just find it very fascinating that on this one end, the private centers and Head Start and school districts, the real, kind of cookie cutter early childhood programs like you're talking about, they are striving to become more home like, yet we still find support staff that's working with family child care providers that are pushing them, like you said, to become more like that sterile environment. And I'm like, well, if we're going to push them to be like that, are they then going to be in that position like these programs are to look back and say, well, wait a minute, we took the pendulum too far. We need to bring it back. And I think long term, the answer for everyone in our field, family child care or, other centers and programs, we all need to create this, you know, soft place for children to land. And it's got to have those elements of feeling like they're at home. I mean, this is their second home. I'm not sure where it comes from other than a couple of things. One, a misunderstanding of what family childcare is in the first place. And part of that is an assumption, and this is something I know you and I come across a lot, an assumption that a family childcare provider is not an educator, is not going to have an environment that educates, that needs somebody to come in and say, okay, great, you want to do this? Here's how you become an educator. And, for some folks, they do need that help and support to get started and get on their way. But there's others that have been doing it a long year or long time or have come from the early childhood field in the first place that already understand and know that. And I think there's too often that assumption that they need to overcorrect in order to get them where they need to be, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with everything you say
Really?
too,
Because
and
we
I
don't
would
always
also,
agree. So that's
yeah, that's true. However, I do think that I will say that I would add something to something you said before. You talked about this soft place for children to land. I think it has to be a soft place for children and
absolutely
families to land, right? And I think if we start talking in that way, then we get back to the fact that it's not just a
right.
child space, right? It's this family space that we are creating, because that's essentially what we do. That is the, you know, and the reason why I think, Patricia, you and I talk about the unicorn of family childcare is because we're talking about it that it really is this magical space for children and families. The relationships that are built over time are so magical. I mean, I just had one of my um, family childcare children the other day just email me and say, I'm having twins, right? I'm gonna be a dad. And I was just so heartwarming to kind of see that. That's a relationship that I had built with that child and that family over years. I mean, my son still goes and hangs out with him all the time. That came through that very special relationship. But I think when it comes to family childcare too, I think when it comes to any early care and education, we think that the learning has to take place with a special object and don't value how the learning takes place. I will say, probably right prior to me actually closing my family childcare business and moving on to doing advocacy for family childcare, I started to move back in that direction that I wanted to. And I cannot tell you how many times I had to fight, like, why are the children sorting a basket of socks here? And it's like, because they're sorting and classifying.
It's
This is,
not
they're
about
not
the
only
sock.
learning. It's not about the socks, right? But it is about the socks. It's not about the socks, but it is about the socks. It's about the children, yes, sorting and classifying the socks, but guess what? We all
Right.
wear socks.
Right.
Sometime in the child's future, they are going to wash socks. So it was like this whole
Well, it's
process of how
about
do we take care of
recognizing that
socks?
there
How do we
are
wash?
everyday objects, part from things from our family time together and our family responsibilities in our home that also are great educational opportunities. The idea that you can only learn sorting with little plastic bears is just, ridiculous. There's so many, I know both of us use the term real and relevant all the time in our teaching, whether we're working with, anyone from the field, from family child care to private, and that those real items that are part of something that they're going to recognize that's relevant to their lives and their family and what is going to happen when they go home at night. That's when those brain connections start getting made between what happens at school and what happens at home. If you can actually do the same kind of activities that they're doing at home with their families and pull the learning out of it, I mean, that's when things do get magical. I agree.
So getting back to the question of what is a high quality family childcare environment, for me, I think it comes down to, having an environment that is respectful of the family, respectful of the culture, includes ways that we can see all families in the environment and all children. And there are ways of doing that without making our program look like this center. I used to do this really crazy thing, Patricia. I just have to share with you that I used to actually have on poster board and I would have a theme every month. Don't ask me why I did this, but I themed it after soap operas, right?
Oh
So
no,
one month,
Donna, you're going right into that stereotype.
no, but I used to have like all our children, and I would have pictures on this. It was basically a science board, right? That folded out. And so I would just literally put it up on like my entry table when families came in. But at the end of the day, I would have like one the next month was Young and the Restless. Every once in a while, we would have General Hospital with all the boo boos
I
and things that
never
had
thought
happened
before
over
about
the
the
month.
correlation between all those titles in early childhood, but they fit perfectly now that you mention them. All our children, young and restless. I mean, this is perfect.
They
Yeah,
were,
they do
it was
work.
all there, right? And then at the end of the day, I would just simply fold this science board up and I would stick it behind
Right.
my couch. So it during the day it came out. I did the same thing with like all my licensing information. Who said I had to have a license hanging on my
Right.
wall 24 hours? Nobody. But it had to be displayed during opening hours. So I got to the point where I had this. I think there are ways of doing it, of really truly looking around your house and saying, how do children apply information as adult? What would this look like if they went home? And I think you hit the nail on the head. Most families don't have a bunch of different color little bears hanging out in their house, right? But they do have items that they come into contact with every day that they can um, children can see themselves and their families in your home and in their home, which really brings that connection together. So no family childcare home is going to look the same. I think that's the beautiful piece of it, right? That's beautiful. It really does reflect the family and the culture and so forth. That's why families seek
Right.
out specific family
Right.
childcare providers because they see
Exactly.
themselves
That was
in
something
that.
I always encouraged providers. For years, I did a workshop at conferences on creating inspirational family childcare environments. And it was based off of my book, From Babysitter to Business Owner, which you can find at Red Leaf Press. And my whole point was that they should all look different. My program attracted the families that were a good fit for my program, both from the planning and the pedagogical point of view and the curriculum and all that, but also just the look of the environment. Like I said before, I had this full size tree. It looked like you were outdoors when you were in our classroom. I was inspired by And I can't remember that restaurant where you look like you went outside, but you're inside. And but I would tell providers all the time, think about yourself. What makes it? Where's your happy place? Because if you're happy, they're happy, and what represents you. And for me, it's being outdoors. I'm a farm girl from Iowa. I did a field trip every single week, sometimes two. We were all about being explorers and being outside. We would spend just tons of time outside. But I also live in Wisconsin, where it's cold and we have to stay inside a lot in the winter months. And I wanted to bring that outside inside. And so I reflected that in my environment. But I knew other providers that reflected completely different things, like my friend Mary, who had a beautiful environment that looked like an art studio, because that was her focus and her passion. And she was able to use that to support children. And she attracted folks that had an interest in art or jobs in art and that more artistic kind of person. I used to call them the granola bar parents, the ones that would put granola bars and water bottles in a backpack and head up to Devil State Park on the weekend to go hiking. That was the kind of family I wanted. The ones that thought it was awesome. I was putting them in my van and taking them to a million different places to explore. So it's not for everybody. And I think we have to stop trying to think that we have to create the perfect environment for every single child and instead really embrace the uniqueness of different families and different children and find the right fits with each other. And I wish centers and other programs did that. They often can't, Head Start school districts, they don't have a choice as to which families come. But family childcare providers do. We're a private, program, and we can really embrace that culture and uniqueness of a certain small group of families that we can take it to places that other programs just can't, because they can't get so specific about the interests of one particular group of people. But I think it's something that is worth embracing, not ignoring, and I think it makes a program just so special for the children and the families.
I couldn't agree with you more. I had families who literally sought me out, Patricia, because I had animals inside and outside,
Yeah,
right? I lived on a farmette too, right? But it was because they had somebody in their family who was allergic to animals, and they had a child who really loved animals, and this was going to be the way that their child got exposed and got to have pets.
exactly.
Really having
Yeah.
pets, right? Because we often forget too that it's our families and our pets are all
Oh yeah.
part of the environment also, and what they kind of bring to it. So quality family child care homes is, I think, it really is what you make of it. It's not about the stuff, and I think you have a wonderful way, Patricia, too, talking about the it's not about the walls.
Yeah,
It's
we're going to probably do another whole segment just on that one and licensing and all that kind of stuff. But I have always questioned, why are we so caught up on the walls and who owns them? It shouldn't matter who owns the walls. Quality care is quality care. Quality care for children should look the same in a building that is owned by a church versus a building that is owned by a school versus a building that is owned by a private individual. Quality care, we know there's certain elements of quality care that can be applied to any setting, anywhere. And I think we need to focus more on those. I think we get too caught up on who owns the walls and what those walls should look like. And if we could remove that kind of piece out of it, I think we'd be a lot closer to what works. But another thing I wanted to mention is I think NAFCC, the National Association for Family Child Care, gets it right in the slogan that they have for their national accreditation: many right ways. I use that phrase all the time when talking about family child care. And I think it's just the perfect slogan for their accreditation system, because they're really embracing the idea that there are many right ways for environments to look, for programs to look, and that they're going to be very supportive of children and families.
Right. And I love that that the NEFCC standards, which, anybody can pull down from nefcc.org, right? Really goes through, and when they talk about environments and having materials, it doesn't say it has to be out all time. It's about children having access to it. I remember walking into this family child care provider's home, and I'll be honest with you, the first time I walked into her home, Patricia, I was like, what are the children doing here, right? But it was magical to watch the children walk in, and when she had this, they look like just closet doors in
Mhm.
her kitchen, but when she opened them up, it became like this magical kind of space right
Right.
behind it, right? Where there was lots of access of materials for children. And then we walked into her living room, and I thought, well, this is a fancy dancy little living room, right? But I got to watch a child who walked over, and they pulled this bucket out from underneath the couch, and it was full of blocks and materials, right? And she had this beautiful armoire in there that I thought, wow, that's kind of really nice. But again, when you opened it up, she had musical instruments hanging on it, right? She had these things that children could put, and it was magical. It was this really magical place that at the end of the day, you could see she closed it all up, and you could see it was really part of her family. And I took some inspiration for her. I remember after that going out and getting like one of those IKEA cube shelves, right? Nice bins for it. And I had them labeled where children could pull them out. But at the end of the day, I just flipped it around so the label was on the inside. And it just looked like this absolutely beautiful shelf that was in my living room. And so I think if I am hearing you correctly, and kind of my conclusion, that it's not about the walls, it's not about the stuff, right? It's not about which room in the setup. It really is about how the provider builds a relationship and uses the materials that they have to create quality learning
Pull the
environments,
learning
right?
out
Because
of the materials and the furniture that are relevant to you and the families you serve, and feels like home. And yeah, and transformation. I mean, you're absolutely right with that whole story. I've been in several family childcare environments that you feel like you're in a Transformers movie because things are just popping out. I think one of the fun ones I saw once was a provider that had those window shades, those solid window shades. And she pulled them down, and she pulled down one and it had her calendar on it. And she pulled down another one and it had a felt glued to it, so it was her flannel board. And she had another one that was sprayed with chalkboard paint, and it was their chalkboard. Like, she had all these things on her windows. It just looked like shades that were on the window, but when she pulled them down, they became the space for some of the activities that she was doing. And I thought that was pretty brilliant. But transformations, make sure, if you're not using that separate space, that separate room, embracing that transformation. Don't feel like you have to make your family live in an early childhood classroom, because you can learn just as well from all these other materials. You can hide and turn and things. And even like you mentioned, the armoire. Think about your furniture does not have to come from a school supply store. You can use real furniture. And I think you and I's favorite provider that we know does this very well is Debbie Mays. People can find her on Facebook, and she's always posting beautiful pictures of her family childcare environment where she uses beautiful antiques and repurposed furniture that she has. And it looks like the kind of furniture you would put in your own home, in your living room, in your kitchen. And it contains all of the wonderful, materials and toys and equipment that the children need for her educational environment. But it looks like a beautiful space. So, who's to say what shape the shelf or the cabinet has to be in, or what color it has to be? We can certainly have beautiful furniture in our spaces for children too.
And I love that. And I think there's a balance there, Patricia. And I think we should basically do another podcast another time, because I think we could spend an hour on it. You don't necessarily have to have everything you've purchased for the last 40 years out and available to children, right? The whole thing that happens there, are being more mindful about what it is that we are buying it and why we are buying it and so forth, or how we're getting that information. I, you know, we could talk for hours on the environment. I think we have such passion about it. I think, there's places out there that providers can go for more information. Definitely looking at the environmental piece of the NEFCC standards, looking at the Family Child Care Environmental Rating Scale has some really good information on it. Connecting with providers, right? But don't be afraid to push back too. If you have somebody that is coming into your home and is saying, you have to get rid of that couch, or you have to get rid of that chair, or you need to order some, materials from a catalog, push back,
Yeah, read them
right?
closely. I
Um,
mean, that was something I learned from you years ago, is that, if you get questioned on a particular, told that you have to do something specific, ask, show me the standard that says that specifically, not your interpretation of it, but that specifically says I shouldn't have this adult size chair or couch, or, because 9 times out of 10, it's just an interpretation from someone that's coming in. And it's someone that doesn't have a good training and understanding and background of family child care. And so question it. I know there was lots of times my licensor came in and asked me to do something, and I would say, if you can't show it to me in black and white where it's clearly stated, you're wrong. And I fought back and I won every time that I did that. I went through 17 years, never had a single licensing violation. And but that was not all providers know their licensing rules inside and out and are willing to push and advocate for that. But again, that's a whole nother show that we can do. I think we need to wrap up this conversation or it'll go on for another 2 hours. So I think we definitely unearthed a few more questions that we will certainly continue to explore in future podcasts. But I think it's time to put the button in this one.
Yeah, I would ask them, as this podcast is really posted and as folks go through and review it, I would love it if folks really did um, respond and give feedback and share pictures with us of the uniqueness of their family childcare space, and what they're
Yeah,
doing.
go to, familychildcareexperts.com. There's links to all of our social media sites in there, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. This podcast will be posted on the YouTube channel. If you're listening to it now, but you'd like to see us, you can certainly find it on YouTube. And please, please, please send us your pictures of your environment. What makes it unique and special? And we're there to help share the voice of family childcare so that we can provide insight to those that don't know family childcare as well as we would like them to. And so we absolutely would love to hear from you, and any questions that you have as well that you're hoping that we'll explore in further podcasts. We'd love to hear those as well. So before we completely wrap up, we do have one small little segment we like to end as a wrap up in any of our podcasts, where we just talk a little bit about what we're reading right now. Donna and I are both very avid readers and are always going through lots of different books, sharing books with each other. We even mailed them back and forth between Maryland and Wisconsin sometimes with all the notes in the margin. And one of the things that we found over the years in the reading that we do is that sometimes we're reading books that are within our field and they're very useful and helpful to us, but we also like to get outside the box and read some things that maybe are not connected to our field now and then. And we found that by covering a wide variety of topics, that we very often can find some useful and inspiring information from books that come from outside of our field as well. So sometimes in, sometimes outside of our field. But Donna, what are you reading today?
So I'm actually reading two different books right now. At this point in time, I would just say I just finished up the book called Measure What Matters. I'm a big data girl, and so for me, it's about what are my goals? How do I measure those goals? Are they meaningful goals? Are they really getting to where I want to go? I think a lot of times we don't spend enough time on the data. I know a lot of family child care providers and providers out there are always collecting child outcome data, but they should be, thinking about how they're using the NEFCC environmental standards or the FICRS tool or Fidelity tool for a curriculum that they may be using on, what does it say and how do I continue to use all of this information together to set goals to get to where I need to go. But the other book I'm reading is a personal book. So I belong to a Book of a Month club, and it's actually a fiction book, and it's called Someday Maybe. And it really is a story about a woman who loses her husband and then finds out she's pregnant, but she's going through this whole process, the stages of grief and everything. And brought me back to, for the second thing is because I was talking about this past week to children with special needs, and that I think that we often don't understand that families, that when their child is born, we have this opportunity, Patricia, where we tend to do it. And if you think back to your own children, that child is in your belly or you're adopting that child or whatever, and you've got their whole life mapped out for them, right? You have envisioned their entire life, what it's going to look like, right? Then you start to understand that this child may have some special needs, right? And so forth. And I think we often forget that when we are helping a family through that, I think way too often we can be critical. I don't understand why that family doesn't understand that their child needs support and so forth, that they actually go through these stages of grief. And so I've been really watching this woman through this magnificent story, the way it's being told, and really thinking about that together, because we do know that a family member goes through this just as if you were to lose a loved one. Folks go through these stages of grief. But even when we are beginning to recognize that a child has a disability, we are starting to go through these stages of grief and being respectful of that and understanding that everybody goes through the process a little bit differently. So those are my two reads that I've kind of been focusing on right now. So there's even a lot of times I'm grabbing stuff from fictional books that I'm reading and books that I've read for business purposes, and so forth. And it's just, so that's what I've been reading. So what have you been reading, Patricia?
Well, the first one I'm reading as well, so we're kind of doing that one together. But interesting fiction book. So I've got two that I'm doing as well. The first one is Authentic Strengths by Fatima Diman. This was given to me by a bunch of coaches that I work with in Modesto, California. They all signed in the inside. It was so sweet of them. The author is a friend of theirs, and it's about really tapping into your strengths, positivity, that kind of thing, and how that helps you get through adversity. It's written through the lens of how a coach can use this information. But there's just a couple of highlights I kind of put bookmarked in here. One of them, just at the beginning, they have a quote from Vincent van Gogh that says, if you hear a voice within you, if you hear a voice within you say, you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. And I'm always looking for good quotes like that.
Love that.
I think I'm going to add that one to our little board where we have the one from Albert Einstein that if I had, that's the big one that kind of guides Donna and I's work, where he said, if I had 1 hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes trying to figure out what the right question was, and then I could solve the problem in 5 minutes. And we love that. But a couple of things that she says in the book here, one of them says, rather than making a mistake an occasion for fear and humiliation, welcome it with exuberance, and that neutralizes the shame. And she tells this story about a guy, and he had something happen that was some humiliating, and basically coached him to say, you know, how fascinating, and to get all excited whenever something kind of showed up that he had done it wrong. Like, oh my gosh, I learned so much from that moment of when I got it wrong. And, you know, that kind of hits home for me. I think a quote that I've shared often in my trainings and keynotes and stuff is the one from my dad, where he used to say, a mistake is only a mistake until you've learned from it, and then it's a lesson. And that was really kind of the guiding mantra in our family, was to embrace mistakes. And so I'm always drawn to anything that kind of talks about that. But I'm at the part right now, I'm just kind of a third of the way through it, where she's talking about some of the research and stuff, that they're showing that the research shows that the more you try to think of suppressing a negative thought, the more you actually think about it. So as soon as you say to yourself, don't think about, you know, that thing, your brain just hears that thing and it keeps thinking about it and thinking about it. And you actually can make that worse by telling yourself, don't think about this. Instead, it's, you know, try to get a mantra in your head of what the positive things are that you do want to be thinking about. And again, I think of children, you know, and how we talk about in guiding children, we don't want to say what not to do. We want to talk to them about what to do. And I think it probably comes from that same place, you know, when they're talking about research and brain development, that's what our brains do. If we mention it, it doesn't matter if we've said don't before the statement. We're mentioning something and our brain thinks about that something, whether or not we've framed it as don't. So it's all about strength, thinking about your strengths and capitalizing on your strengths. And I'm finding it very interesting, and I'm very grateful and thankful for the group for sharing it with me. The other one, I can't even say the whole title for it. It was recommended by someone on our team, Angelina. It's a Kindle book that I'm reading that says "Stop Giving a," and I'll just leave the last word as a blank. But that one's also pretty fascinating as well, about how we need to, you know, kind of embrace our true selves and you know, not get all worked up about what other people think.
I love that, because I think that ties so beautifully into kind of what we've been doing today, Patricia. It's we need to stop worrying about what other people think about our environments, and be able to explain it and say, this is why I'm doing this. This is how this supports my children, my
Yeah,
families, and my love for the work
exactly.
we do.
Stand up for
But
yourself.
we're all caught up. Yeah, we're so caught up in what other people will think. And again, a family will accept your environment if you can explain to them why your environment is set up the way
Absolutely.
it is.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's enough for today. We're going to wrap up this episode. We want to thank all of our listeners and followers on YouTube. We really appreciate you coming on this journey with us and exploring all these questions. Remember that we want to hear your questions too. Make sure you visit our website, familychildcareexperts.com, and connect with us on social media and get those conversations, questions going. We'd love to hear books you're reading as well, all of that. So until next time, be the disruptor, just like we are, and ask the question. Thanks so much.